Hi, good morning. Thank you for joining us this morning for our community conversations. Today's conversation will feature many of our esteemed colleagues who will be providing important insights on today's events. We will be recording today's website or session and will be posted on the Equity, Inclusion, and Compliance website. Before we get started, I would like to introduce Vanessa Chica-Itza, ASI President, for some welcoming remarks. Vanessa?
Yes, hello everyone. Welcome to the third edition of the CSUB Community Conversation. My name is Vanessa Chica-Itza and I am your ASI President. I would like to begin by thanking everyone who is in attendance today, and I would also like to recognize all of the students who attended the previous community conversation events. I want students to know that the topics being discussed today were all recommended by our students. There are many topics being discussed today, and we plan to expand on these in future conversations. If you have a particular topic that you would like for us to discuss in future conversations, please let me know. I will include my contact information in the chat below. Before I finish, I would like to address the news that was released earlier this week from ICE regarding our international students within the US. I know we may have some international students on this call, and I want you to know that ASI stands with you. We are working with CSUB and the CSU to create a solution, and we should have more to announce in the coming days. You are such an important part of the Runner family, and we will fight for your right to an education without being displaced, and we will protect you. For all of our students, I would like to remind you that ASI continues to be an essential service. Our offices are currently open. However, we recommend that students contact us and communicate with us via email. And again, I will put my contact information in the chat below. I look forward to listening to the speakers today, and I appreciate all of you for your time. I will now introduce Dr. Wallace. Thank you.
I think Vanessa Chica-Itza and ASI and Claudia Catoda with the Office of Equity, Inclusion, and Compliance for the invitation to be a participant in CSUB's summer series as we have conversations relevant to social justice and Blacks in America. My topic for today is my wish for the world. Most of you, I have followed, as most of you have, the series of disconcerting events that appear to be endless as they permeated the country. The tragic deaths of one African American after another. We must recognize that America's justice system is not infallible, and policies and procedures should be evaluated and revised. I, like you, am experiencing a myriad of emotions, ranging from joy to sorrow, tragedy to triumph, pain to prosperity, and hopelessness to hopefulness. Today's presentation for some will be a reminder of where we have been. For others, a look at where we are, and I hope for all of us, a rekindling of the hope and spirit of where we can go. When listening to a presentation, we draw conclusions in two ways: the credibility of the messenger and the content of the message itself. While I am troubled and angry about certain situations in the world, I don't want this message dismissed as just another angry Black man. Hopefully, my credibility gets me beyond this assumption. As I try to do with most situations, I want to listen, learn, and gather as much information as possible. What I thought I would do today is follow the format I did in writing my dissertation for my doctorate. Those who are familiar with the amount of time and work that goes into a dissertation are already worried that we're going to be here all day. Relax, the presentation will follow some of the format, but certainly not the range and content and time required. The dissertation usually begins with a hypothesis and ends with a conclusion. A hypothesis is a supposition or proposed explanation made on the basis of limited evidence as a starting point for further investigation. My hypothesis today is the American people are, in the words of civil rights leader Fannie Lou Hamer, sick and tired of being sick and tired. With the dissertation, there has to be a review of the literature. Because we celebrated our country's birthday on Saturday, it is appropriate to begin the review with the Declaration of Independence. Its passage in 1776 came to represent a moral standard by which the United States would strive. Probably the most well-known statement on human rights is in the second sentence, which reads, "We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." Ironically, Thomas Jefferson, the chief author of the Declaration of Independence, was a slave owner himself. Between 1776 and the end of the Civil War in 1865, history reveals to us the Declaration of Independence forgot to include an asterisk, which should have read, "It does not apply to African Americans and Native Americans." The invention of the cotton gin in 1796 by Eli Whitney all but assured African Americans would be enslaved until the Emancipation Proclamation or the 13th Amendment. Following the Civil War, the passage of the 13th Amendment, we entered the Reconstruction period. In 1870, the 15th Amendment was adopted, supposedly giving all citizens the right to vote. Black Americans won elections in the southern states to the dismay of many white Southerners. The emergence of white protective societies like the Ku Klux Klan emerged and used violence to intimidate Black voters. Federal soldiers had departed the South by 1877, and the protection no longer existed for the former slaves. The economic, political, and social opportunities gained became non-existent. Most African Americans were relegated to sharecropping. By 1885, Jim Crow laws were in full force. By 1896, in Plessy versus Ferguson, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled separate but equal was acceptable, totally disregarding the 14th Amendment. This ruling remained intact until Brown versus Board of Education of Topeka, Kansas in 1954 ruled separate but equal was unconstitutional. Many Blacks began demanding better educational, housing, social, economic, and political opportunities and conditions. As many as 500,000 Black Americans had served in World War II, only to return home as second-class citizens instead of war heroes. My grandfather and uncle were two such men. What is called by many the beginning of the civil rights movement, Rosa Parks, a Black woman in Montgomery, Alabama, decided she was not going to relinquish her seat on the bus to a white man. Many other marches and protests followed. In 1964, Congress passed the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Resistance to its passage was followed by acts of violence and discrimination targeting African Americans. The Civil Rights Movement, sometimes called the I Have a Dream movement, now brings us to the Black Lives Matter movement, which is called by some I Can't Breathe movement. The series of deaths, including Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and George Floyd, scream to the world Enough is enough. Please understand this list does not include the names of countless others. The callous disregard for human life exhibited by the Minneapolis police officers touched the hearts and souls of individuals worldwide. While the officer held his knee to 46-year-old George Floyd's throat for 8 minutes and 46 seconds. The officer's derelict duty outraged all human beings with any fiber of decency in their bodies. Is a man's life worth a $20 counterfeit bill? I hope the answer to that question is a resounding no. The review of literature revealed that in spite of the challenges associated with social injustice, unprovoked violence, economic depression, inadequate housing, subpar educational resources and opportunities, racial discrimination, and bogus policies and constitutional privileges, we still have survived. Not only survived in some instances, but excelled. We now ask that America grant people of color an unapologetic opportunity to succeed. As stated on the website of the United Negro College Fund, we can't simply believe in equality in education. We have to create it. It should be a partnership of people representing every walk of life. Please understand, this is not going to be easy for some individuals in our American society that have become comfortable with life giving them an unfair advantage that was earned by some but inherited by others. It is time for all Americans to be uncomfortable and dissatisfied with what America has become and welcome the difficult conversations we must have to initiate change. Realizing we're not going to eradicate 400 years of oppression in one day, 1 year, or 10 years. But let's begin the journey together with meaningful, purposeful, genuine, and robust strategies. What began with prodigious language in the Declaration of Independence and brings us to the Black Lives Matter movement cannot be the blueprint we use in moving forward. Next, with the dissertation, we move to the results section. The results section will be presented using a different format. In Arthur Ashe's book, Days of Grace, there was a section dedicated to his daughter, Camera, which was his wish for the world. To give this proper context, the book was written during the time Ashe was dying of the AIDS virus he contracted during heart surgery at a New York hospital when doctors used blood infected with the virus. While his life was taken by tainted blood given to him, it should be noted that he chose not to sue the hospital. Like Ashe, I also have some wishes for the world. We have seen the Black Lives Matter movement gain momentum. Streets are being painted, caps and t-shirts being worn, protests and marches taking place. Even the National Basketball Association will resume the season later this month at Disney World in Orlando with the courts painted with Black Lives Matter. I am honored with the focus being placed on the movement. My wish for the world is that the police seize the brutal and senseless killing of people of color so that we truly know Black lives do matter. WNBA star Maya Moore put her career with basketball on hold so she could devote her life to defending imprisoned men of color that do not have the financial means or networking to defend themselves. My wish for the world is we have more Maya Moores in the world to dedicate time, talents, and resources to the less fortunate. The city of Bakersfield again leads the state in percentage of homicides based on population. We see our children being murdered, increase in gang violence, homelessness, and disregard for human life. The Black man is becoming an endangered species. My wish for the world is that we all take on the attitude of being my brother's keeper, that we understand that it is more prudent to invest more money for educational and developmental programs and services for our youth, with the hope that we will need to invest less in building prisons. Kristen Cooper, a Black man, exhibited unbelievable self-control while bird watching in New York City's Central Park. A white female, Amy Cooper, no relation, had her dog unleashed in the park, which violates the leash requirement. As recorded with his cell phone, Cooper calmly asked her to put her dog on a leash. She became angry and aggressive and said, while approaching him, "I'm going to call the police and tell them there's an African-American man threatening my life," and she did. Knowing the perception that some police officers have of Black men, she was comfortable making such a statement. My wish for the world is the power and influence of good police officers, which I believe the majority to be, become strong and persuasive enough to weed out the officers whose intent is not honorable. My wish for the world is that all police officers handle the situation in Central Park in the manner that these police officers did. Had the wrong officers answered this call, we could have had another unfortunate incident. I also wish for the world that when Black and brown fathers no longer have to explain to their sons what to do when pulled over by police officers, when the only violation is the color of their skin. Recently, I have heard some individuals criticizing those who are not participating in marches and protests. My wish for the world is we understand that individuals contribute to the cause in different ways. Marching, writing resolutions or proposals, rallying or encouraging change, speaking or meeting with legislators are just some of the ways to make contributions. Please know it could be an elderly neighbor that offers encouragement, a granddad that says to Junior, "I am so proud of how well you're doing in school." June 23rd, 2020, an article in the Californian indicated that the president of our United States of America, while speaking to a student gathering at a mega church in Phoenix, Arizona, said, "You are the courageous warriors standing in the way of what they want to do in their goals. They hate our history. They hate our values. And they hate everything we prize as Americans." My wish for the world is we get beyond using divisive measures to create tension and separation in the country. Regardless of one's political persuasion, we must work together to face difficult times ahead. We currently do not have a vaccine for COVID-19, but we do have a vaccine for social injustice, hate, economic depression, and police brutality. That vaccine is civility, understanding, faith, hope, and love. 1 Corinthians 13:13 reads, "Three things will last forever: faith, hope, and love. And the greatest of these is love." My wish for the world is that all Americans not only read this scripture, but practice it in our daily interaction with one another. The dissertation should always end with a conclusion. My conclusion is, if we are truly sick and tired of being sick and tired, we must seek understanding before healing. We must void all personal agendas. We must move from the words them, those, and they, and practice including us, we, and our. We need each other. In the words of the lyrics from one of Barbra Streisand's songs, she says, "People who need people are the luckiest people in the world." We must become the luckiest people in the world. I end this presentation with the prayer that I began each day with. I pray that we become advocates for love over hate, peace instead of war, justice rather than injustice, resolve over conflict, and civility over dissidence. Thank you for allowing me to share my thoughts with you today.
Dr. Wallace, I don't know what to say. I mean, thank you so much for your words. You're very inspiring. I think, like me, like most people, I feel a call to action to make sure that we're all treated how we're supposed to be treated, with humanity and with dignity. Thank you. I would like to next introduce Dr. Dwayne Cantrell, Associate Vice President for Enrollment Management, who will be moderating today's panel. Dr. Cantrell.
Thank you, Claudia, and thank you, Vanessa and ASI, for supporting these conversations. I'm honored to serve as moderator for today's community conversation. And Dr. Wallace, I really want to thank you for your impactful comments, for your words, and for sharing your wish for the world. I think you so eloquently captured the sentiment of the feeling of being sick and tired of being sick and tired. And the statement and sentiment of enough is enough. And if I may add one that I keep hearing, are we still dealing with this? Hearing eloquently in your wish for the world, those sentiments. And I love how you stated how we must be our brothers and our sisters' keepers through this, utilizing a vaccine of love. So I thank you for your comments. Thank you for allowing us to walk with you through that journey of learning where we've come from, assessing where we are, and establishing a path forward. So thank you, Dr. Wallace. And if you could hear the applause, I can see the chats coming in. Lots of applause and thanks and well wishes for your message are coming through. So thank you for your impactful words, Dr. Wallace. The panelists today were asked to consider the multitude of issues that we're currently facing in our society. And so with those issues, we were having a conversation of what can we talk about and how can we deal with this and how can we address this? And so a question emerged from this that became somewhat of a theme, and that is, where are you right now? So each panelist was asked to look at themselves from their own framework, from their own places where they exist, from their own work. And really come at this conversation from where are you right now? And they had the freedom and liberty to take that from their point of view and their framework. Each panelist has a unique perspective that I'm confident will serve us well as we are all navigating these unprecedented times in our own ways. And so each panelist will have 5 minutes to share their insights. And after all of the presentations, we'll respond to questions and comments from the community. So allow me to introduce the panel to you today. It is my pleasure to introduce our panel, Dr. Rhonda, Associate Professor of Sociology, Tanae McCall, Pell Grant Coordinator and Financial Aid Advisor, and if I may add, parent of a CSUB student. Dr. Janine Crable, who's Assistant Professor of Political Science. Dr. Ivy Cargile, who's Assistant Professor of Political Science. Dr. Bree Evans Santiago, Assistant Professor of Teacher Education. And Dr. David Sandals, Lecturer in Teacher Education. To the panelists, we applaud you, we appreciate you, and we thank you for your participation. With that, our first presenter is Dr. Rhonda Dugan.
Hopefully everyone can hear me. Thank you, Dr. Cantrell, for that introduction. I am humbled to participate as part of this campus community conversation with my colleagues today. I first want to say thanks to the ASI and ASI President Vanessa Chicaiza, Claudia Catota in the Office of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, and to Jorge Villatoro, who's been doing all the work behind the scenes to help make this happen. So I want to say thanks, and thank you all for being here today. So we have a little bit of time, and in addressing this question, some of it's going to be, where we are now. Some of my reflection will be very rooted in sociology, and some of it's just going to be my own thoughts because, contrary to popular belief, faculty are human too. So to get things started, I have a hard talk to follow because Dr. Wallace touched on some points that I'm going to highlight here, but in a different way. So since the horrific killing of George Floyd on May 25th, we've seen significant changes addressing anti-Black racism, or at least anti-Black racial biases that have occurred for centuries. And that's not to be dramatic. We're talking centuries here. So these changes have ranged from the removal of statues of Confederate generals, even Christopher Columbus, modifying flags in Dr. Wallace's home state of Mississippi to remove the Confederate symbol, right? We've even seen white actors and actresses who have voluntarily recused themselves from doing voiceovers of Black and mixed race characters on animated TV shows like Family Guy. If you're familiar with the character Cleveland Brown, he was voiced by a white man, Mike Henry, up until last month. Or if you've seen Netflix's Big Mouth, the mixed race Black character Missy Foreman Greenwald was voiced by white actress Jenny Slate. So with public pressure mounting after May 25th, Black social protest has played a significant role in some of those changes, right? But as I sort of look and reflect on these changes, one question that has popped into my mind, because these have long existed, is why now? Right? What is it at this particular socio-historical moment that such changes are now occurring, right? These demand for changes are not new. So what is it at this particular moment that makes it important that we see these changes happen? So while some members of society may question, why are we still talking about this, with this meaning race, racism, Black people, I and perhaps many others of you, and almost in a feeling of bewilderment, at least for me, why now? So in my short time, I want to share some of my thoughts with you, some of which are sociologically bound, while others are simply my own personal reflections. So this might seem a bit odd, but if I were to title this talk, it would be called Pancakes and Policing. So bear with me. So because of my academic and personal interest in popular culture and media, I've been particularly interested in sort of corporate-based rebranding of consumer products that have used racist language and or racist imagery to sell everyday food products like pancake mix with Aunt Jemima and also with syrup, and rice like Uncle Ben's. Thank you, Jorge, for that first slide. So there's some imagery. So for instance, to focus on pancakes, Quaker Oats Company announced last month that it was rebranding the package of their line of Aunt Jemima products, not only in imagery, but also in name. This, however, is not the first attempt of Quaker Oats in rebranding the product line. So as you can see, while the company softened Aunt Jemima's look over the past few decades, she went from wearing a kerchief and having language that's kind of dis, dat, and does that fulfills those stereotypes. And now she's, rocking a well-coiffed roller set. But yet she's still smiling for us, and the name never changed, right? And so it's important to understand not just the imagery, but the significance of that name, because the origins of the name come from a minstrel show that was performed in the 1850s, where a white man in blackface portrayed a character named Aunt Jemima and performed that for white audiences. So for those of you who are confused when people post on TikTok blackface, this is the reason why you don't do this, right? Because blackface is seen as racist. Its origins have historical racial origins. So why am I interested in this particular dynamic? I think it's interesting because sociologist Patricia Hill Collins refers to her work of this imagery called a controlling image, in which she describes images designed to make racism, sexism, poverty, and other forms of social injustice to appear natural, normal, and inevitable parts of everyday life. Right. So essentially, these are public depictions of Black women in stereotypical ways that have greatly contributed to their overall racial, gender, and economic class oppression by the white power structure since slavery. So Collins expounded upon this controlling image, specifically of the mammy, of which Aunt Jemima is, right? So this idea of the mammy figure as being always happy, obedient, taking care of white families' kids while neglecting her own family's needs, subservient, cooking, what have you. And if you might think such imagery does not have power over us and how we see others and how we interact with others, Collins cited Black feminist writer and activist Audre Lorde, an experience she had in a grocery store in the late 1960s. And so here's the little quote. "I wheel my 2-year-old daughter in a shopping cart through a supermarket, and in 1967, and a little white girl riding past in her mother's cart calls out excitedly, 'Oh, look, mommy, a Black maid.'" So this little girl saw a Black child and automatically thought, because of that controlling image, a baby maid. That's powerful, right? That's the ideological power of a controlling imagery. So while Collins' work of controlling imagery centered on Black women's multiple oppressions through this imagery, she expanded her work. Her work can be expanded to focus on Black men, which she did in a book called Black Sexual Politics in 2005. And it's also important to know that these ideas of controlling imagery can be applied to other racial groups, genders, and sexuality. So for example, back in April of this year, so if we can go to the next slide, the company Land O'Lakes announced their own rebranding of products, right? So for nearly a century, Land O'Lakes used the controlling imagery of a Native American woman, whose name was Mia, by the way, to sell butter and other dairy products. So simply, the company removed the image, and now the products will show, go figure, one of the many lakes that exist in the land of Minnesota, right? So whether motivated by capitalism or real concern, you can see that corporations can really make these changes. It's really not hard. So it makes you think, or you should ask yourself, why did it take so long, right? So I'm eager to see what will happen with this pancake line, right, in the future. So now here's the second part of my title, Policing and Policy. This is the hard part, and Dr. Wallace has alluded to some of this already. As we know, there have been any instances of Black women and Black men who have been harassed, physically and emotionally traumatized, and are killed as a result of their contact with law enforcement. Some names I have here: Tamir Rice, Michael Brown, Eric Garner, Stephon Clark, Breonna Taylor, Tiana Jefferson, Botham Jean. Unfortunately, I could go on and on with that list that I cannot unfortunately recognize here. So while there was outrage and social protest, most notably seen in Ferguson in 2014, I don't think that what we see now has been at this magnitude after May 25th. So regarding Black Lives Matter, right, if we can go to the next slide, there's data that have shown that people are responding positively to Black Lives Matter, where in the past there was this concern that it was a fringe group or it's negative, and we hear the response of the tired trope of all lives Lives Matter, right, in the sense of negating the experiences of Black people. So painting streets with Black Lives Matter, changing street signs, this is something that was not happening. So, this is a part of my questioning of why is this now, right? And maybe it's partly because of being sequestered in COVID and people are paying attention to things and they're not as easily distracted by the things we were in a pre-COVID world. But I also reflect upon the George Floyd video, that imagery, which may counter the very controlling imagery that Collins talks about of the threatening Black man. Perhaps it was the audacity in which Officer Chauvin displayed his demeanor in those 8 minutes and 46 seconds on camera with his knee firmly and deeply pressed in George Floyd's neck. Casual, nonchalant, his hand in his pocket, that really got to people. Floyd wasn't resisting. He wasn't running away from the police. Those tired statements that we hear when people deny the culpability of those officers who have, done these things to Black people. So for perhaps once, people were really able to see the sheer raw brutality that many Black people and other groups of color experienced when in contact with law enforcement. So ultimately, so this is sort of my personal reflection to finish up, despite the outcry with the local, national, and international protests, my greatest fear is what has been past practice after such events. After a few weeks or month of increased awareness and protests, the real changes that need to be addressed regarding policing and systemic racism and policies will be forgotten or superficially addressed. It's one thing to change a problematic icon on a pancake box. It's really finite, but it's another thing altogether to really work to dismantle systemic racism in our social institutions. I realize I have to be patient. I hope I am proven wrong this time, because there are only so many times that I can feel numb from the disappointment and hurt when I think about the past cases. And one past case is that of Philando Castile, who 4 years ago, this past Monday on July 6th, was shot and killed by a police officer in St. Paul, Minnesota. According to the details of the shooting, Castile had done everything right in that traffic stop, including informing the officer he had a gun, which he was legally licensed to carry. With his girlfriend Diamond Reynolds in the passenger seat and their 4-year-old daughter in the backseat, the officer fired the gun out of fear and killed Castile. Ultimately, the officer was acquitted. So as the story emerged, we found out that Castile was a hardworking man who worked in the St. Paul Public School District, where he was a nutrition services supervisor at the time of his death. He was deeply loved by his students and colleagues and family. So in sort of thinking of this question of why now and thinking about the stories of Castile and others, maybe the question to really ask is, why not then? Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Dugan, for the powerful history and words. It's very important for us to have an accurate retelling of history. So thank you so much. We appreciate your remarks. Our next speaker is Tanae McCall. Join us, Tanae.
Hello, everyone. Just want to say thank you to the panel, Dr. Wallace, Dr. Cantrell, and the ASI president and everyone for allowing me to be part of this panelist group. I was very excited. So the topic I'm going to talk on today is pretty much respect. So Jorge, you can go to my slide. I just have the one slide and it's just pretty simple. I feel I'm going to talk more on a personal aspect and part of a society aspect. Like respect, we're somewhere along the line, people have forgotten what respect is or haven't been taught on what respect is. So on my slide, I put, some key people on there, just kind of so you guys can see what their perspective is on the respect and their feelings towards respect. But with Mr. Floyd, I feel he was completely disrespected. I mean, him and all the other individuals that we have lost, or even those we haven't lost. There may be some that are alive that experienced the disrespectful situation, whichever may have occurred. But as far as respect, I'm just going to talk about what respect is, where I feel it has fallen, my personal experience with respect, how I teach my kids and to be respectful and so forth. So respect is just pretty much that positive feeling or action expressed towards something or someone. So in order to earn their respect, you got to be respectful towards others. Then you have respect, where it breaks down into two different aspects. You have self-respect and respect towards others. With the self-respect, it's of course respect for yourself, being able to just loving yourself. You have to love and respect yourself before you can display that towards others. So growing up, my parents always told me, no matter what, me and my brothers, no matter what, you guys always walk up with your head high. Never walk down, slouch, always keep your shoulders up, head held high. And so that way others know, okay, she feels good about herself, But that was just one thing. And that's the same thing I do for my children. Always walk with your head high. Never walk with your shoulders slumped. Let people know that you are proud, you have that integrity, and you have a pride about yourself, because that rolls into others respecting you. So the part of respect of others is just, again, that respect coming from other individuals. And I feel that respect, where it has fallen, is either it's not being taught in the homes, or people just are not respecting themselves. So the respect of others, I'm going to give you an example. When it's definitely listening, you always have to listen. That's one of the key things. So my example is when Mr. Floyd was on the ground and he's yelling out for his mom, or he's telling them, I can't breathe. That was total disrespect towards him. The cops or the police lost complete respect for him. But what are the other individuals that they lost respect for? So that's one key thing that I see as, the respect towards others. And the respect comes from parents, your children, your relatives, teachers. For example, when I was raised, and I still do to this day, I teach my kids the same thing. When you reach out to someone like your aunt or uncle, address them as Uncle so-and-so, Aunt so-and-so. The same for teachers, Mr., Mrs., Doctor. So, and the same thing with the authorities. I mean, other individuals have to be willing to listen to you. And by listening to you, they're showing you that respect. And I feel like that's something that has definitely been lost. I think it's something that can be trained, that should be part of the training within the law enforcement careers, because they get into the mind frame and they forget. It can happen. They forget that, okay, I do need to respect. Even though I'm on higher authority, I still need to respect these people because they're human beings just like we are. And the other thing I've always been taught, and I teach my children, treat the others the way you want to be treated. That's the most important thing of respect. You got to treat others the way you want to be treated. And the other thing is defend yourself against disrespect. And a lot of people are like, well, how do you do that? So to me, when you're defending yourself against the disrespect, you're just simply letting the person know if you felt you were disrespected, simply talk to them. And it's not an aggressive talk. You don't have to get angry. You just kind of explain to them and let them, hey, I wasn't comfortable with what you said to me or how you approached me. So that's one way that respect can be gained. So you have to bring it to someone's attention if you feel like you were disrespected. And another thing is that respect is a major part of human socialization. So what that means to me is I feel socialization of respect must be taught at a young age. We must teach our children and society, because sometimes if children are not taught by their parents or another person within their household what respect is, they'll never know. They'll never know how to treat people with respect. They'll never know how to respect themselves. So I think that's one major thing that needs to be taught. Definitely needs to be taught at a young age and continue through life. And as the parents show that respect, the children will pick that respect up from them. And the other thing is we owe a basic level of respect to others, whether they use a counterfeit $20 bill in the store. The cops as an authority, you should still provide them respect. I mean, if they're not resisting, if they're not putting up a fight, I don't see why we would have to be resisted against or thrown to something. So if you approach someone with respectful generosity, then you'll get that respect back. So that's just, my thing is just straight up respect. And I just kind of want to touch on the points of what it is, where I feel it fell off, how we can get it back. And if you see someone being disrespectful, it's never a problem, as long as they're not too aggressive, to jump in and say, hey, call people out on it. If you're not talking to someone right, or if you are doing something that, or you see something that they don't have business doing, I would always jump in. Like my kids, hey, always say thank you, please. And that's something that I don't have to tell them, because I instilled that into them as a younger child. So that's what I feel like respect has definitely fallen off. Hopefully we can get that respect back from individuals, people within the society that's dealing with the racial battles, with the gender battles, people that turn their backs on them. We just need the respect back so we can gain that respect for everyone, and we can all come together and have peace. That's it. Thank you, Jorge.
Thank you so much for those words and that teaching, Tanae. You echo Dr. Wallace's sentiments of antidotes to some of the ills in our society, and certainly respect and human kindness deal with that. So thank you so much. Now I want to introduce to you Dr. Janine Crable, who will be our next presenter. Please welcome.
Hi, everyone. It's nice to see so many participants joining us today. So thank you for taking the time to do that. And as my fellow colleagues on the panel that have gone before me have stated, I'd also like to thank all of those responsible for putting the panel together, the Office for Equity, Inclusion, and Compliance, and Drs. Wallace and Cantrell and ASI. So thank you so very much for having me be part of this conversation, and all of the panelists and all they have to contribute to it. Today, I want to talk about something that has been on my mind as a political scientist, and also just a member of our community locally, and just being a member of our country. And that's what's at stake in the 2020 election. And I'm particularly, though, going to be talking about what is at stake for younger voters, younger generations in the 2020 presidential election. I'm of the belief that every election is incredibly consequential, but I think now it almost seems more than ever that this election we're really at a crossroads. And I know many times in our country studying political history, we have been at a crossroads, but I definitely would say in my lifetime and in generations that are younger than me, this is a year that has really jolted us and has been kind of just a time period where a lot of things have come to the head. And so I think it's important that we look at our students who are still millennials, and then also Gen Z, and the issues that are facing them. So the way that my talk is structured, I just wanted to talk to you today, so I don't have any slides, so you're going to have to deal with seeing me and listening to me, is I want to give you some data about your generations, and also some of the issues that your generation is really facing, such as economics, housing, the environment, immigration, but Dr. Cargile is going to focus more on that. But also other things too to be thinking about in terms of how your vote has such a long-lasting impact, or if you don't vote, how it has such a long-lasting impact beyond Election Day. And so those are some of the things I'm going to talk to you about before I pass it on to my colleague, Dr. Cargile. I think one thing that's really important is when we talk about millennials and Gen Z, is that these two generations have witnessed an incredible amount of crises, to be frank, in such a short period of time. So over the last 2 decades, your generations have witnessed several wars. They've witnessed the Great Recession and have seen their parents, their relatives having to deal with the impact of that and having to rebuild their lives. Mass shootings, the negative effects of climate change, and now you're witnessing a global pandemic. And you are also also witnessing how leadership is and is not responding to that global pandemic, making this election even more consequential. One thing that is profoundly important to really understand is that your generations comprise over 1/3 of the country's voting population. That's huge. That is such a big piece of currency that your generation has to really impact who gets elected and what policies come into play. And so if there's anything today that I leave you with is that the idea that your vote doesn't count, is a falsehood. This is not the time to stand on the sidelines. This is the time to make your voice heard, because if you coalesce, you have the potential to absolutely change the outcome of this upcoming election at the presidential level, at the House, at the Senate, at the state level. One thing that is really important too is that we're also seeing a huge generational divide in our country between baby boomers, the silent generation, Gen X, who remember a certain world, and for millennials who've never experienced that world. And it's time now, it's the time period now of this new generation to make sure that they turn out to vote, and so that they can create a world that is more rooted in social justice, that is more equal for all, and that is more sustainable. And so having that kind of backdrop in mind, I wanted to talk about just very briefly, and this is not an exhaustive list, just briefly about some of the issues that are very consequential for our election coming up, and giving you some data. Some of this data is going to seem a little dismal, but trying to drill the point home about why you need to make your voice heard, and why it is that you need to make sure that our system changes to better suit, a new generation of community and leaders and whatnot. So, for example, one of the major issues that is facing you is the economy, and also how education is intertwined with that. So right now we have a student loan crisis in our country, and many of us are experiencing that with $1 trillion of student loan debt. The average graduate walks out with $30,000 of student loan debt. You've also had coupled with that, the price of college education has gone up extramentally. It has gone up, for example, in 2019, you had 69% of college students take out loans. And now kind of looking at where, maybe why is it that I should continue my education? And I would argue that now more than ever, even though we are facing those challenges, you need to stay with your education, and you need to be making sure that you're voting for people who are looking to make your education more affordable. Some of the reasons why it's vastly important for you to be thinking about these things is because overall, sticking with your education and your college education in particular leads to several things. One, you have increased job opportunity. You can prepare for a specialized career. Over time, you're bound to make 66% more in terms of income than someone without a college education. Having a college education doesn't just impact you, it can impact the lives of your family. So even during this difficult time where you may be discerning these things, sticking with your college education is one of the most profound things you can do as a guiding light right now. Another thing, too, that your generation is dealing with is housing, as we talk about housing becoming increasingly more unaffordable. And so making sure that politicians and elected officials are creating policies that takes away that stratification and essentially is creating real meaningful pieces of legislation to help people get into housing, whether that's renting, home ownership, things of that nature. Another issue that we know that your generation is facing is climate change and the impact of climate change. We really see that in the state of California, as we used to have wildfire season, and now it seems like that's not just a season; it can happen at any time. And we also see global temperatures rising. We see how it is too that the impact of climate change and global warming they don't necessarily impact all populations the same. You tend to see communities of color and those on the lower socioeconomic level impacted the most. And so again, looking at these issues and thinking, this is not my time to sit on the sideline. This is my time to get engaged in electing leaders that are in tune to the fact that the status quo was not working and that we need to be making major headway in reversing some of the damage that has been done. Dr. Cargile is going to speak more about this, but in regards to immigration, we've heard some unfortunate news this week coming out of the administration in regards to ICE and our students who are international students and who may be at risk because we're having to go online to protect us and protect one another and protect our students. Uprooting people's lives, taking away people that are so essential to our community and the fabric of our community and our economies, as our ASI president started off with, is something that we're not going to stand for. And if anything else doesn't get you motivated in this election, it should be things like that and the racial injustices that we are seeing. Another thing that I want to point out before I start getting a little more hopeful is that sometimes we think to ourselves that, well, I'm not going to vote. Whoever becomes the president or whoever becomes, a senator or a House member or city council person isn't going to impact. It's not going to change my day-to-day right now. Well, nothing could be further from the truth because elections have long-lasting impacts. And I think judicial appointments are a prime example of that. If we look at the current administration, for example, the president has made his 200th appointment to the federal judiciary, and that's across the board at the Supreme Court level, the appellate level, and the trial level. Particularly at the trial level, those have seen the most appointments, and that's incredibly consequential because they almost become like a farm league for the appellate and the Supreme Court. And that is a way for a president to leave a long-lasting handprint on our institutions of government and on future policies and social issues that justices and judges will rule on. And so it's also important because even though a president may be there 4 years, maybe they're 8 years, the ramifications of their policies can impact your generation, your children's generation. And so staying attuned to those things and informing yourself and thinking long-term, that your vote is a long-term action, not just for that day, is really important. And knowing that you have power to shape institutions like the judiciary, for example, when you're casting your vote, either for the president or even for the Senate who confirms these appointments. Another thing that I think and other colleagues have touched on it, so I won't harp on it and more, and others are going to be speaking on it in greater detail and in better detail than myself. What we're seeing in regards to issues of race and policing that have always existed. And now, whether it be because of technology or other reasons, they're more up in front of our face, and they're calling us to act and calling us to respond. And listening to how it is that candidates are talking about these issues and what their priorities are around these issues is really important. One thing to bear in mind is, even though in discussing some of the topics that I just briefly went over, it may seem dismal or unhopeful, the thing is there is hope. And I know this sounds like a cliche, but your generation really is that, particularly when you see your numbers. Like I said, over a third of you, 37% is what your generation is of our electorate. That is serious voting power. The other thing too to keep in mind is that when you think about how it is that you're going to get engaged during the 2020 election, you may think that because of the pandemic that we're undergoing, that there isn't a way. Well, there are many ways that you can still be getting involved. One is, and this is probably one of the more simpler ones, is making sure that you're keeping yourself informed of candidates that are running, informed of the issues that you are being presented with. Another thing too is, and I know that we'll be having more conversations like this at CSUB, the Department of Political Science will be having events, the Pre-Law Society, the Poli-Sci Club on campus, is keeping in tune to events that we're having during the electoral season, even virtually, so that you could be staying engaged. There are many offices that are still looking for interns, even if doing it in a virtual type of capacity, to do phone banking remotely, for example, to be helping put out information to the community. So those are just some of the simpler ways that you can be getting involved. Another thing, too, to be thinking about is voting, right? Voting on election day. We've been hearing a lot of mis and disinformation about voting by mail, which is happening in the state of California, as our governor signed an executive order allowing every registered voter in our state to receive a ballot by mail. I think it's really important to listen to politicians who are supportive of expanding the franchise and also those who are creating fear. I think it's really important to understand that voting by mail is a very safe way to vote. Sometimes we hear about these discussions in regards to voting fraud, which is less than 1%. And we've had even studies from MIT that have come out and confirmed that. So knowing that, making sure in the state of California, for example, that you are registered to vote 15 days before an election. I say register today. You can go on to the state of California's Secretary of State website, and you can go, and we'll put that information in the chat, and you can register today and make sure that you get the ability to vote by mail, which is an incredibly safe and assured option during the pandemic that we're in. I think another thing too that's important is to make sure that you are checking in on your representatives and making sure that they are attuned to the issues that your generation is facing. So for example, you can go to ca.gov, and you can look up who it is your state assembly person is, who it is your state senator is. You can go to usa.gov. And again, Jorge and I will be putting this information in the chat, and you can be looking up who your local representatives are. But the point is to make sure that now more than ever, you're trying to pay attention. And I know that it's difficult because many of you are dealing with so much during this time. But again, this time is showing us that we need you more than ever. I know it sounds, again, cliche to say that you are our future, but you truly are. And so as I wrap up and move the time to my other colleagues, I essentially just want to let you know, just like Dr. Wallace had stated at the beginning of his talk, that individuals can contribute in all different types of ways to be making our society more fair, more equitable, more just. There are many ways for you to be getting involved in the 2020 election, some that I specified, some that we're going to be sharing with you as we get closer to the election. But my wish for the world, at least us, in the states and participating in the upcoming election, is that you'll find ways to get engaged, that you'll make sure that you're registered to vote, that you will take the time to be informed, and that you realize all of the important items that are on the table. And so thank you so much for your time. I believe in your generation. You are giving us hope. I hope we'll get to see you in person sooner rather than later. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Crable. They're very important lessons on the importance of the upcoming election and the history therein. Very, very important. So thank you for sharing that. Our next speaker is Dr. Ivy Cargyle, who will continue on the frame in a different lens, but she'll continue on this frame started off by Dr. Crable. Take it away, Dr. Cargyle.
Thank you, Dr. Cantrell. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for allowing me to share some thoughts regarding all that is happening right now. Thank you to everyone who is joining us, CSUB and Bakersfield community, and thank you to all the organizers for putting these very important conversations together. So on the heels of the 4th of July, I want to start with the brilliant quote by Frederick Douglass to kind of set up a theme for this talk. Power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did, and it never will. I think this quote helps us understand the fire and urgency that is driving the social movements we are witnessing and experiencing right now. So let me start off with explaining a concept that is being widely discussed and thrown around, the concept of intersectionality. Intersectionality is an approach that is used to describe the challenges that Black women and women of color encounter because they have overlapping and intersecting identities that work together to many times hinder the progress, access, and opportunities of these women. So for example, where a white woman who is speaking in a loud voice might be described as stern, a Black woman is described as angry. In other words, the angry Black woman. So the concept of intersectionality describes a situation where we can't really say that what is hurting the Black woman is that she's Black or that it's because she's a woman, but the reality is that it's because it's both. So these two identities intersect, and that creates perceptions in the minds of individuals about who this person is, and therefore bring on stereotypes. Clearly, we're at a point where we are having these kinds of conversations where we learn about these concepts that will hopefully help us grow. So in moving forward and thinking about the idea of allyship between Black Americans and non-Black people of color, we need to understand why working together and for each other matters right now. In preparing for today, I was reminded that since I was a child, I have always been captivated, infuriated, and inspired by the struggles for equality that ensued in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. Being exposed to this kind of history at a young age, it has always been clear to me that as a non-Black Latina in the United States who comes from an immigrant family, my family and I owe the Black community a lot in regards to the rights that we currently enjoy. Beginning with the Civil Rights Act of 1964, it was the Black community who literally put their bodies on the line so that government officials would work together towards making the core values of the US Constitution a reality for all Americans, regardless of skin color, national origin, religion, or sex. The Civil Rights Act is a pivotal piece of legislation that ensures protection from discrimination, and while it is not always upheld, the case is that it really does matter that it was passed and that it is in fact a law. The second piece of legislation that I think is also very pivotal is the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Despite the ratification of the 15th Amendment that gave all citizens, regardless of race, the right to vote, and despite the passage of the 19th Amendment giving women the right to vote, happy 100th anniversary to the 19th Amendment ratified in 1920, Jim Crow laws didn't allow anyone who was not a white male to vote. And it took the passage of the Voting Rights Act in 1965 for all citizens, regardless of any characteristic, that they had to finally have the right to register and have the opportunity to show up and vote. So please keep in mind that while some people have been voting since 1789, some of us weren't allowed to vote until 1965. Once again, though, it was the Black community who, for the most part, did the heavy lifting in regards to protesting, using their voice and their bodies to demand access to the power that voting has. Learning from the Black community, 10 years later, the Mexican American community was able to demand and get the 1965 Act amended to add protection for language minorities. Thus, after 1975, all citizens had the right to vote, and they had the right to do so in the language that they were most comfortable in. These gains, however, are not possible without the struggle, determination, and the sacrifices of the Black community. So it's clear to me that I have the honor of being a PhD and a professor because the Black community started a fight for equality that benefited white women and all Black, Indigenous, and people of color. So when non-Black people of color ask right now, why should I, as a non-Black person of color, protest and fight alongside the Black community and the Black Lives Matter movement? My answer is because historically, politically, and socially, the sacrifices that they make when they fight for rights end up benefiting all of us. Because let's just assume, right, that police departments decide that they're going to begin to reform and change their training and policing approaches. Is it the case that when police interact with Black people, their new training is going to come into play and they're going to start treating Black people with respect? But then when it comes to an interaction with a Latino, Latina, Latinx person, that's going to go out the window and they're going to go back to their old ways? No, that's not the way it works, right? So what I'm saying is that when it comes to social justice work and all that is being done right now with a focus on the Black community and the progress that will be won, the benefits will come for all of us. So why wouldn't we want to coalesce? Why wouldn't we want to work towards progress, beginning with why wouldn't we want to work towards progress, bringing positive social, political, and economic change? These are public goods. They are like the air that we breathe and the water that we drink. While there are various struggles that are happening right now, like the babies who still are in cages, working alongside the Black community to help them at this moment only makes us better and hopefully more united to continue fighting for the rights of all immigrants, documented and undocumented. The question isn't about forgetting about one cause in order to help another one. It's more about helping out the current cause in order to gain knowledge and more allies in order to help with all the causes in a more unified and in a more knowledgeable manner. Allies are going to be needed in order to continue the fight for immigration. Specifically, the fight that the Dreamers are currently in. In light of the recently decided Supreme Court case, Department of Homeland Security's versus UC Regents, which was a victory given that DACA was not rescinded. But what now? For now, Dreamers are protected, but it is the case that this community of immigrants is still in limbo. Because at this point, the Trump administration has been stopped by the Supreme Court. But to echo Dr. Crabill's message, this is why voting is so important for those of us who can do it. Many activists have noted that this administration and subsequently Republicans are not interested in keeping DACA alive or really doing anything about immigration other than deportation. So in order to make sure that this community is protected, voting is vital. So please, let's get out there, let's get registered, and let's vote. Let's do this. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Dr. Cargile. That was very, very important and critical that we know, and all of us deal with some form of intersectionality, and us being both the ones who are navigating these experiences and the need to be allies is very, very important. So thank you for your words. Our next presenter is Dr. Bree Evans-Santiago. Please welcome her.
Hello, everyone. I'm going to go through my slides rather quickly. So if we can go ahead and start with the title slide, Jorge, please. So I am going to address being Black, identifying as a Black person, but also being LGBTQ plus here at CSUB. Next one. I first wanted to start out with my own background and positionality to be able to help you see and understand where I'm coming from in this space. So you can see some of the work that I'm doing and how I identify. I did not put Black on there because as a person of color, you see that, but there are some things about me that you may not know. And so I wanted to state those items there in my very first bullet. And I really believe in stating who I am to be able to provide that space for those that identify different than me, so that it's not always asking someone to come out every time that we introduce ourselves. So I like to provide that safe space. Go ahead and go to the next slide, please. Oh, and I think Chris Grappendorf is here. I co-chair and co-advise with her. So I wanted to personally give a shout out to her and thank you for your work and support with our endeavors. But I want to start and have the conversation. At least 39 million of our US population identify as Black and LGBTQ. That's important for us to think about because those are only the ones identifying as or stating it. And so we need to really take a look at that and think about those numbers. But out of those people, they attend college. And so I wanted to personally address and discuss CSUB and the CSU. Because suicide is the second leading cause of death among people ages 10 to 24. Those are our students. And so for me to do this work, it's because I do not want to see our students, our kids wanting to take their lives because of the struggles and the insecurity and the safety that they lack, the loneliness, et cetera, that builds up in all of these spaces. So that's why I do this work. Go ahead and move to the next one, please. But today specifically, I wanted to do a trans fam shout out, forgive all the typos, et cetera, because I was so excited to even do this space. I don't know how many students on here even know who Marsha P. Johnson is. But if you've heard of Stonewall riots, you should know who Marsha P. Johnson is. And I wanted to absolutely state that and give her that space because she helped when we talk about prides and we talk about marching and we talk about parades. Every time that we do that, we're taking a stand. So it may be a different type of riot or maybe a different type of march, but we are absolutely taking a stance and walking forward to be able to say what we believe in. And she was a part of that. And I wanted to absolutely recognize her for that. Brian Michael Smith is the first out trans male that attends regularly in television shows. And I wanted to state that because trans males don't get all the TV shows. You don't see it as often as you see trans women or trans female identifying people. It doesn't make it right one way or the other, but I wanted to at least take this space to acknowledge and honor our Black trans men that are out there because they're doing great things as well. And then this last picture, India Moore, also identifies as transgender, but non-binary. And so I wanted to provide you that space to see that we have various people that identify differently as in terms of gender that you might see on television. And why do we have to see them on television? Because over 80% of our population do not know or acknowledge a trans person. And so that's a big deal. So we use media to be able to see and understand who these people are. And so the next slide, please. Here are just a small snippet of LGBTQ in pop culture right now. This is not acknowledging our past historians, our writers, our poets that have continued to pave the way for us. And I don't know if you've seen Disclosure, but I was schooled a little bit because I did not realize that there were so many Black trans actors and people within like media and writing so long ago. So that was really eye-opening to me. So I wanted to just provide you with the list because you know some of these people. And that's because of the pop culture. But because of that, I wanted you to see and understand that there is a space for us and that we need to be able to move forward and do more here on campus. So if you can move to the next one, please. At CSU Bakersfield, I wanted to specifically address these issues. The CSU as a whole believes in diversity and supporting the LGBTQ plus community, and I'm very thankful for that. It's visible in their websites. But we also took the time to submit an application and be recognized nationally through the Pride College Index. And with that space, it looks at things like inclusion, policy inclusion, academic life, student life, housing, etc. And because of that, you receive scores. We're at a 3.5. We're at a 3.5, and there's work to be done. Here are some of the things that we are doing. So take a look at those and think about where we are and where we could go. Lavender graduation, if a lot of people don't really know what that is, I encourage you to take the time to look that up and to see what it's about. But know and understand that it's an affinity group celebration for those that at one time were not able to even be recognized or attend a graduation celebration. And so it's in that same space as others, as our BIPOC people, Black, Indigenous, and people of color who experience some of the similar issues. And we do have 2 student organizations on campus that I wanted to make sure I recognized as well, which is the LGBTQ Plus Network and Club Gen. Okay, and the last slide, I'm talking so fast. So what now? We need to become one of the top 25 colleges in the nation. That's what I believe. If you look at this Pride Index, why aren't we there? What can we do? What aren't we doing? And continue to check off those lists. Look at it and let's continue to be more inclusive and supportive and address the justice issues that we need to look at as a whole for our LGBTQ plus population on campus. We need to learn about the people around us. If you hear or meet someone that identifies in a different space than you, that's okay. So what does that mean? Ask questions, research, learn. You could Google anything, not saying it's all accurate, but I'm saying there are people out there now providing accurate resources or just telling their own stories. Take the time to learn and to think about it. Be visible on campus, display your support. I'm talking to allies, faculty, staff, students. That may mean that we have to look at safe zones. How often are we having them? What do those entail so we can get more people involved? And then also be vocal on campus. If you see someone doing something that is hateful towards that community or any of our communities, stop those hateful actions and language. Use social media to promote social justice. What are you seeing? What events can we attend? What do you stand for? Let's start being that voice. Recognize the violence, suicide, racism, homophobia that are in our county, in Kern, but then also on our campus. Okay, and I'm not going to repeat that, but I want that to sit for a minute. And I want us to continue to move forward to be allies. All right, and then my very last slide. This, I don't know if you know this person or not, but this is an 18-year-old trans male, Black trans male, that was physically assaulted down the street on Kroll Avenue, down the street from CSUB. This could have been one of our students. He can still be one of our students. What are we doing and what are we standing for? And how could we move forward to ensure that our Black students, whether they identify as LGBTQ or not, are being supported and accounted for here on campus? So my last statement, and identifying as a Black pansexual faculty member on campus, I want to continue to challenge us to improve upon the support for our LGBTQ plus BIPOC students on campus, and of course, faculty and staff, especially for our trans community. We need to take the time to learn about our trans community, and I hope that you do that. Please contact me or anybody in our organizations or in our student organizations or faculty and staff affinity group if you have questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Evans-Santiago. That was very informative, important, critical for this time. So thank you for all the work that you do in advancing our awareness as we continue to strive towards unity and support in our whole community, in all of our communities. So thank you for that. Our last speaker today, before we entertain comments have been coming forth, but as we entertain any questions, our last speaker is Dr. David Sandals. Please join us. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Cantrell. Thank you all for constructing this powerful forum for conversation. There are too many people to name, but for all those involved in the process of developing this opportunity, thank you all profusely. And thank you to the attendees for being present. Thank you so much. I'd like to begin with the premise that high quality education is an indefeasible right for all students, particularly in the current milieu in which we operate. I believe that, and I believe that all CSUB faculty and staff believe that. I have to believe that. The truth, however, is that many Black students have been woefully underserved and underprepared, failed even when it comes to their early educational experiences and exposure of and completion to college. Using almost any metric, we can reasonably conclude that appreciably more needs to be done to service this population and to help recruit, support, and graduate Black students at CSUB in particular. Now, at the outset, I should have said, I'm an educator. I'm a longtime educator. I taught in the K-12 sector for many years before coming over to CSUB. Because of that, I have robust experiences in planning circles. Jorge, if I can get the next slide, please. Thank you. So a regular feature in planning circles and educational communities is backwards mapping, or planning backwards, or some variation thereof. And so the image you see is representation of that. Essentially what that means is, at the outset, you establish a goal for yourselves, a learning goal, and then you work backwards to achieve that goal, infusing incremental features, checkpoints, et cetera, to ensure progress toward that larger objective. What I'm submitting here to you today is that as a campus community, we must utilize a framework similar to this as it pertains to getting more Black students on campus and hearing their voices in an effort to uproot anti-racist policies, practices that have taken place since time immemorial. So what I really urge is that we use this framework as a guide to guide our thinking, starting with the goal of increasing our numbers, and then identifying what the early elements look like. What does it look like when students are in the womb, for example, when they are zygotes and embryos and infants? How does it look? One way I feel we can achieve this early recruitment is on an individual level. Parents, future parents, speak with your children about the prospects of attending college. And what I mean by that, it sounds sort of nonsensical to speak to zygotes and embryos and infants about such a thing, but the idea is through your messaging, encoded in your messaging is the idea that this is an important notion that you're raising. So continued messaging of that type sort of sets the stage for students intuiting the importance of attending college. It's not just college, it's really the thinking that surrounds attending college, the planning, the scrutinizing, et cetera, all of that accompanies the planning process for college. It also really helps create what we call in educational circles, generational literacy, to help combat the cycle of illiteracy that is so present, particularly here in the Kern County area. So in addition to speaking with them, I would really urge parents and future parents to consider talking to them about the mental, emotional, and psychological benefits, notwithstanding the economic rewards associated with attending and graduating from college, but the spiritual and potentially physical efflorescence that can occur consequent to students attending college and being a part of those campus communities. As a campus and college community, what we can do is we can reach out in more intentional ways to help our Black and underserved communities and schools. And we can explicitly speak out against anti-racist policies and practices that have plagued us and that continually do so in a variety of spaces. And so really quickly, I want to give a shout out to our university outreach office headed by Mr. Darius Riggins. It does a fantastic job of reaching out into certain communities, really all communities in our area, and making connections with them. But as an addition, what I believe personally is that I must take the charge, and others should take the charge of being more interactive with underserved communities. And I want to give an example of what I mean. This is a quick anecdote. Several years ago, I was a teacher at one of our local schools. I mentioned earlier, I came out of the K-12 sector. Well, I taught at one of our local schools, one of our underperforming, underserved Title I schools. And then CSUB president, Dr. Horace Mitchell, came out to speak with my class. I had a friend who was working at the university at the time who just asked him if he'd come, and he willingly came and spoke to my students for over an hour about the merits of college, about leadership, and a range of other things. That singular visit resonated with those students, so much so that even years later, they still talk about it. Now, those students didn't know that he was no longer president, but I've had students ask me where he is. So outreach efforts like that, they don't always have to be by a dignitary of Dr. Mitchell's magnitude, but certainly outreach efforts where we are explicitly putting ourselves in a conspicuous manner in front of these kids and advocating for attending college. It's an invaluable piece of imagery. So I'm going to be brief, but I want to say one more thing. Someone told me recently, I was having a conversation with a parent, and so this person told me after I advised them to bring their son on campus, have lunch, and consider CSUB as a post-high school option. And the parent said to me, "We can do that? I'm not even a student at CSUB. I can just walk on campus, even though I'm not a student." So that really struck me because she really didn't understand that there weren't physical barriers preventing her from being on campus and that she wouldn't be accosted and removed from the campus because she wasn't a student. So to me, that underscored the importance of outreach making those connections with our community partners, letting them know that we are a community serving institution and that we are here for them and to uplift our underserved communities, particularly our Black students. And so some of these methods that I've alluded to and spoken to explicitly, some of these are methods we can use to help create a conception to CSUB pathway. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sandals. Very timely words and very applicable to how we as a campus can engage. So thank you to all the panelists. And now we will entertain some questions. There is a question in the chat. Oh, now the question is gone.
It's been answered, Dr. Cantrell.
Oh, got you. Okay. Are there any other questions or comments that anyone might have that you would like to ask the panelists? Well, thank you for your comments that are coming in and your remarks and feedback to the panelists and to each of the speakers. I'm sure they appreciate that. And so if there are no questions, and I don't see any questions in our Q&A or in our chat, then we'll just move forward towards our close. I do want to say thank you to all of those who participated today. Thank you for all those who joined in. And we do have a couple of questions. So here's a question. One question is, Dr. Wallace, it says, how can we speak further on love, hope, and understanding through listening to people? The question specifically is, how can you speak further on showing love, hope, and understanding through listening to people?
I think the beginning point should speak through my actions and how I carry myself and what I do for others. I think that's the beginning point. But if they're inquiring as to, am I willing to do more or speak to a group, I don't exactly understand what the question might be, Dr. Cantrell.
Okay, so whoever typed that, you can elaborate on that question. To Dr. Evan Santiago, in high school setting, how might we express that we're an ally in a high school setting?
Actually, in the past couple of years, almost, well, I know of at least 7 or 8 Kern High School district high schools already have safe zone spaces, or actually they have organizations or meetings where students can join the club or what have you, like GSAs. If not, there are some spaces where it's still not accepted or it is frowned upon. And we've seen that recently in the news where people are fighting against it, you know, waving Trump flags and yelling at people and telling them this is what love looks like, a man and a woman holding hands, etc. But there are little things, stickers, you know, bumper stickers, something that, you know, a lot of people have cases for their computers and they could put little designs and stuff like that. Those visible symbols and signs to say, like the HRC equality sign, simple, safe zone, or I believe all people, you know, deserve to be married. Whatever you think is important that you can share and show is very valuable. Listen, because people are out there. Watch those students and see what's going on and be able to be that supporter, that voice where they know that they can come to you to get that support. It's really important. And we want our students to come to college and we want them to make it and to feel powerful in who they are. So it starts there.
Thank you. Claudia, you had a response for that as well?
No, Dr. Cantrell.
Okay, thank you. The next question is, are there any affinity groups meeting online?
We absolutely will be. And we will still have Pride Week. We are still going to have Pride Week. We actually have a meeting today. So we are absolutely still meeting. And please connect with us about anything if need be.
And Eva, if you are interested in seeing which affinity groups, if you want to email me at ccatota or ccatota@csub.edu, I can reach out to them on your behalf.
Thank you. Another question is, and this is to the panel at large, anyone can answer this question. How can we extend the attitude of hope and love to people when we don't agree with them or their methods so that we can support each other towards civility? Express whether you believe listening and more listening plays a role of support and civility. Any of the panelists can take that.
I will begin, and maybe others can chime in. Tanae today talked about respect. And so that respect always should be extended. And knowing and understanding that we can disagree and still be friendly is an understanding that exists within an educational community. The fact is that if we agree on everything, then one of us probably is not thinking. So what we have to do is have the respect and the honor and civility in dealing with individuals whose views might be different from ours in a manner that we can have dialogue. And that dialogue leads to understanding, and whether or not we gain anything is really left to the individual if you're open to understanding others.
Excellent. Anyone else on the panel? Okay, thank you, Dr. Wallace. For Dr. Sandals, in a high school setting, in your experience, what are some ways to encourage Black students to pursue higher education?
Thank you for the question. It's an important question. I would say if we are waiting until high school to begin encouraging the pursuit of higher education, we fail Black students yet again. I think it's powerfully important to begin that process so much earlier, as I alluded to in my presentation. But if in fact high school students are in need of that encouragement, I think it's important to present them with the economic realities of not attending college, not pursuing that higher degree versus someone who does not. And so I really feel as if, or does not attend college and see that degree. So I really feel it's important to create that juxtaposition in their minds so that they can palpably see the importance, the economic value of attending college and completing. But I really earnestly feel as if that process has to start so much sooner, and it has to be a regular fixture throughout their educational experience. Education meaning academic training, and apart from that, outside the confines of classrooms. So real life learning, so to speak.
Thank you, Dr. Sandals. It looks like that concludes the questions or comments in our Q&A. And before I turn it back over to Claudia for some closing announcements, I just wanted to again thank the panel. And I just wanted to share this question with everyone who's listening. Now that you've heard this, so where are you right now? And I ask you to consider, all of you to consider, and all of us to consider, where are you right now, honestly? Where are you in your heart? Where are you in your emotions? Where are you in your thinking, in your space that you might be living in right now? And what is your wish for the world? We all have different frames and different lenses and different viewpoints that we're coming from, but what is your wish for the world? And so how do you turn your wish into a dream? And then how do you turn your dream into a vision? And then how do you turn your vision into a plan? How do you turn your plan into a step? And as you take each step, how does each step become your daily walk towards that wish you have for the world? So again, I want to thank Claudia Catoda, Vanessa Chicaisa, and Maria Espinoza and ASI, Dr. Wallace, Dr. Dugan, Tanae McCall, Dr. Crayville, Dr. Cargile, Dr. Evan Santiago, and Dr. Sandals. And I want to thank you all for joining our community conversation. And I'll turn it over to Claudia for some closing announcements. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Dr. Cantrell. And we do have one more question actually in the Q&A.
Okay, another question. Thank you, Claudia. As a Black woman, I tend to get the stigma of being angry and aggressive when I'm passionate or addressing a concern. Therefore, becoming passive to not receive a viewpoint that would make me any less of my classmates. What should we do if, as a student, we feel defenseless due to a teacher abusing their authority and grading unfair due to potentially the color of your skin? So any faculty want to take that one?
Rhonda, did you want to, or Ivy?
And more than one of you can respond.
I think that this is a systematic issue that we've had to deal with throughout our educational lives. being a Black woman, that has absolutely been something that I've experienced even, as a child, and then up to this space as an adult. I have learned to have my own back with research and with evidence, because they can't fight what's already written. And so as long as you have your own back with whatever they're saying, even me, if I was a professor and I said this and that, and you're like, but you said, show me the facts, get your facts straight, have the evidence, and it will absolutely give you a platform to be able to stand. Continue to talk with respect, continue to do what you think is right, recognize the situations and move forward, but always have that evidence. Always have that evidence.
To echo Dr. Evans Santiago, that's what I was going to suggest. I think it's a tough question, and it's a terrible situation, but it does speak to the systemic issues that exist, not just in education, but I think across the board. And like Dr. Evans Santiago, my suggestion would be to have as much evidence of the inequalities that you are experiencing in the classroom, and even with grading and anything like that, and then see if you can then either bring it to the professor's attention, or if that hasn't worked, then bring it to the chair's attention. But if you have that evidence, if you have the research, that's what's going to help. Unfortunately, in these kinds of circumstances, that's what should be able to help you. This is also where it's important, I think, as students, for those students who are still in the conversation, this is why it's important to go to office hours. This is why it's important to get to know your faculty, right? Because this is where other faculty might be able to help you navigate this very difficult terrain that might seem like it has landmines everywhere. And it doesn't have to be faculty within your department. It can be faculty that you've taken for general education classes. The idea is, though, make sure that you get to know faculty, and that you have some faculty who you think are your allies.
I guess I'll also ditto that. And I would say, as someone who teaches research methods, I tell my students to come to find evidence, right, in that regard. And I understand how you feel, because to flip, the minute I walk into a classroom, I can feel that vibe. So I know, and I'm not just seeing this as being a student, but also as a faculty member walking in the classroom, you can kind of sense that feeling, especially when I teach my classes on race, like, oh, here we go. She's going to be angry, or she's going to have a position. So I myself also have to make sure I have the correct information. In fact, so I think it's not just as a student issue, and I would agree with my colleagues, but also for myself walking in and who I am, I have to think about those things as well and be prepared. But definitely talk to other students, but definitely talk to faculty, get to know faculty on campus, that could help you talk through those things, and not have to have that experience alone is probably what I would add to my colleagues' comments.
Okay, and the last comment we have in the Q&A is actually a comment, and it says, "Great panel today. Thank you, everyone." So Claudia, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Cantrell. Thank you for joining us today for this important conversation. I want to thank all the panelists, Dr. Cantrell for moderating, as well as Dr. Wallace. Our next community conversation is scheduled for July 23rd at 11 a.m. Just to keep in mind, these community conversations will take place every other week, always at 11 a.m. Thank you very much for joining us. This also will be posted on our Equity, Inclusion, and Compliance website if you'd like to check out the slides as well as the presentation. Thank you so much.